I don't know about you, but it feels like more and more organizations and companies are shifting their virtual engagements to in person. So I wanted to ask our loyal podcast listeners, do you know of an event that a company or association is hosting that would benefit from an in person speech? I teach how to use storytelling to make a greater impact, how to build a greater team, and the habits of high performing individuals. If you have a connection, I'd be honored. My email address is don@donyaeger.com. That's don at donyaeger.com. If you email me, trust me, I'll reach back out to you and will even send you a book to say thanks. I appreciate you. What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shape their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community. I'm your host, Don Yaeger, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is Ryan Alford. Over the last 2 decades, Ryan has learned from the brightest marketing minds, crafting advertising campaigns for Apple, the NFL, Verizon, Denny's, and Firehouse Subs. Today, he is the CEO of Radical, a marketing agency that he founded in Greenville, South Carolina, and is here to teach us how to leverage our brands. Ryan's Radcast is a top 25 business podcast, and I am excited for him to share the superpower of branding with us. I have my notepad ready, and I hope you do too.
I'm probably the most non-traditional interviewer that I know. I don't ask the same 7 questions. I ask 2 or 3 questions, and then I ask them to ask me questions. And I actually learn more about people by the questions they ask than the questions I ask them.
Ryan, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Looking at your childhood, it's been fun trying to read, study. It's one of my favorite part about each guest that we get a chance to work with. You grew up in Taylor, South Carolina. You were a swimmer, a baseball player, a golfer, but basketball pretty quickly became your thing. And you played as a child with NBA legend Kevin Garnett on some different courts there. And I have to start there. I love KG. I love his intensity, notorious for it. What was that like, even as a child? What did you see when you're playing with little Kevin Garnett? I'm going to assume he was little at some stage. What did you learn? What was the experience like playing with somebody like that?
Well, he was never little, I'll say that. I started playing with him in 8th, 9th grade around then. And we did have a short stint on an AAU team together, but mainly competing in tournaments and different things like that. He was never small. It's funny, I know he's like 6'11", but it felt like he was 6'11" when he was in 8th grade. He was soaring over everyone. But the thing about Kevin is, I look back at it now, and he was every bit the competitor, a little more immature, like we all are in 8th and 9th grade. But that same tenacity was there. He was always the hardest worker on the court. He cared a lot. If you see now a lot of these uber talented kids that don't want to work for it or just have talent and maybe not the work ethic, and the games change and the recruiting and the money and all those things, I'm sure have had an impact on that. But Kevin was always hustling up the court, always tenacious, wanting to win. There was a will to win with him that existed even when he was young that you could see. And he was always, not only in size, but almost like mindset, a man among boys. I mean, literally, I was an above average player at that age and in high school, but he was, a future Hall of Famer in the NBA. The difference between a scratch golfer and a pro golfer. I know a lot of friends that are scratch golfers. Then I have a couple of friends that are pro golfers, and the difference is night and day in their ability to both putt and do different things. And Kevin was the same thing. And not only because of his size and his talent, but his mindset and his tenaciousness with which he played the game. And that existed all through high school. And it was quite the circus, that followed him. If you remember, it wasn't one and done. He went straight from high school.
Straight from high school.
But he was every bit the competitor that you saw in the NBA.
There's a real fascinating lesson in that for a lot of us. Some people that we know, and maybe some of the listeners here, are pretty talented, but talent is not enough. If you want to be Hall of Fame caliber, you want to be best in class, talent is not enough. We have to be committed to doing all those things that the least talented player has to do as well in order to try to make sure we take care of it. You continued on, played at Eastside High School, and I know your coach was Harvey Tankersley. And as you said, you're above average player. You're pretty good, solid. I saw the numbers. Give me a great moment from sports and your participation in them that still resonates with you today.
Yeah, there were several, but I think I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder. I'm right at 6'3", 6'4" in high school, and I grew an inch in college. I had athletic ability. I could jump. I could play well, but I wasn't heavily recruited. And I also wasn't around or didn't grow up in a family that had been athletic and understood the game of recruiting and all of those things. My dad wasn't sending videos of me playing. We weren't playing the recruiting game, but there was another guy who's actually still a friend today that went on to play at Clemson, where I ended up going and played at Furman. He transferred a couple of times. It was Patrick Garner. He's a friend today. He was 6'10", and we had similar ability. He just had 6 inches on me. I don't know if I'm misremembering but I'm pretty sure I beat him out in the voting for all region, by a couple of spots or something like that. And that always stuck with me.
You talk a little bit here about the chip on your shoulder, whatever it is that allows you to develop it. To me, when I look at high performers, it's funny. The greatest of all time all continue to have and regularly played with a chip on their shoulder. And it's funny because people think, gosh, they're so talented. But there's an extra something that comes from a belief that you're not seen as an equal, that something has not worked to your advantage. How did you harness the chip on your shoulder as you moved into your professional ranks?
It's interesting. It can work both for you and against you. I think sometimes you think it can fuel you, but I think as I moved into professional ranks and working, in the ad industry, which is what I've been in 20 years. And it's interesting. As I moved into that, a lot of my peers came up knowing they wanted to be absolutely at an ad agency, had done 4 internships and done all of these routes that seemed to prepare them. For me, I studied the industry, as a senior in college, had friends that were in it. And as I got there, I think I outworked people instead of potentially having the skill set immediately. It was more that hunger and that ability to kind of okay, I'm going to teach myself this. I'm going to outwork people, and I'm not going to be scared to kind of take chances, even kind of at an early age. And I don't mean irresponsibly take chances, but I kind of stuck my nose in things. I asked for promotions. I asked to be involved in other things, to take on more responsibility. I think it kind of manifests itself more in a tenacity or an ability kind of to go at things versus necessarily keeping the chip on the shoulder.
You do come from a family of entrepreneurs, and you've said that your parents and grandfather inspired you to be creative, to constantly think creatively. How did that inspiration help shape you as you graduated from college? How did their leaning into you and working to kind of help you imagine things greatly impact you?
It's interesting. My parents, when I grew up, always had at least, I joke, 12 side hustles. It's a little bit of exaggeration, but no fewer than 3. And at times it seemed like a bunch. It was like the nature. They were entrepreneurs. They both were in careers. My mom was in insurance. My dad was in sales, amongst other things. But he owned 3 or 4 companies. They did a side hustle that was called Floral Fantasies. I remember this growing up, where literally they made silk flower arrangements. So that was one side hustle. We had no fewer than 12 garage sales every summer. I don't know where we got all the stuff. And my dad got it naturally because my grandfather is known to this day as, I think, Greenville's most prolific horse trader. And that's just a figure of speech. He literally had a garage in his backyard and had a barn just full of junk, quite frankly, but somehow was always trading and bartering and had side hustles. And, if there was a car for sale for $300, he'd buy it for $300 and sell it for $500. Just always very entrepreneurial on top of their existing careers. And I didn't recognize at the time of growing up the impact that it had on me. I think you see it happening, and I might be involved. I might have been the money collector at the garage sale, or or even at the trade shows, helping with them doing those side hustles. But I do now look back and think it had an impact on me for developing an entrepreneurial spirit and for wanting to kind of control your own destiny while also figuring out there's a lot of ways to make money. From a early age on, and certainly into my other career, I've never struggled to make money. I've had, side hustles and things. I've sold cars on the side. I've had jobs. And it's not that I haven't had ups and downs. We all have money ups and downs in our life and things like that. But it's rarely been a worry because it seems like it's in our genetics that we know how to kind of figure it out.
I totally agree with you. I think it's funny sometimes if you're the child of, just the conversations at the dining room table are different. And without question, even with one headphone in, I know that my 13-year-old is listening to the conversation about how we run business between my wife and I. And so I love it. I think that's a great thing to pass on. You do go the kind of the large agency route early and end up leading the Verizon Wireless advertising account. And it's a $50 million spend that included the iPhone launch. I read that you have a motto: if it doesn't challenge you, it will never change you. You're looking constantly for challenge. Give me the best challenge that came your way, and thus the great learning that came from those early days in the industry when you're representing big projects like iPhone launches.
Erwin Penland, it was the largest agency in South Carolina when I started working there. We were 77 people, which was a large agency for South Carolina in 2000. And when I started working there, we had a fairly large regional piece of the Verizon business. It was around a $3 million piece of business, which for an agency Erwin Penland size was a very nice piece of business. And myself, Jeff Hoffman, Catherine Sloan, Curtis Rose, we had a really strong core team that kind of came in all around the same time. And literally we worked together and took that $3 million piece of business to $50 million for the agency over a 10-year period. I joke now, owning my own agency, we made a lot of people a lot of money, but we were always the underdog. So you talk about the challenge. We were an agency from South Carolina that started competing with the best of New York for pieces of Verizon business.
Sounds like a little chip on your shoulder, by the way.
It was. And to this day, the biggest compliment that I get, George Sink is a lawyer here in South Carolina, does a ton of injury law. Everyone listening to this that's from South Carolina will know exactly who it is. His son is actually George. He was called Ted in New York, and he was a brand planner for one of Verizon's largest agency, their brand agency. To this day, he compliments me that he couldn't believe the level of skill and tenacity and ideas that we brought, because we were viewed as this little agency from South Carolina, but we came and competed with the big boys and took Erwin Penland's place in that. And what that did was it got us the seat at the table for these launches. We played a large part of Verizon's success in helping them secure deals, working with the iPhone launch, working with Motorola. Ironically, before the iPhone launch for Verizon, it was competing with the iPhone with a campaign called Droid. And then it went on to helping Verizon secure the NFL deal, which they still have today as the official wireless provider.
Yes.
$1 billion sponsorship deal that we negotiated with Verizon and some of their larger key players inside and manage that entire deal. That was a part of our $50 million retainer, was managing that entire sponsorship, all sports sponsorships for Verizon. I think a little bit of a different skew of what you were asking, but every bit of that was a challenge that allowed growth.
Give me a lesson. Give me something out of that experience that the rest of us can do something with. You could have easily sat back and said, let's be polite. We're from South Carolina. We're good. We're nice Southerners. And instead, you went there and went toe to toe. Give me a good marketing lesson that others can learn from that work, that period.
As people, we're very self-limiting. We're afraid to speak up. We're afraid to share an opinion. We all have great ideas. And especially when you have the talent and the ability, you have to put it forward. You have to put it on the table. And I think what allowed us and what allows people to kind of overcome this is, in marketing, it is a series of failures that lead to success. And what do I mean by that is there's a million bad ideas until you get to the great idea. What we weren't afraid to do is walk in and sit at the C-suite and share ideas, to open our mouths and to get in the discussion. And I think sometimes there's overthinking decision-making and getting involved in those things that I think in anything, whether it's marketing or otherwise, the biggest lesson is you've got to put it out there. You've got to be willing to risk it.
Absolutely.
You miss 100% of the shots you never take.
Wayne Gretzky, baby. Go Gretzky.
Exactly. I think that's the lesson.
What an important point is the marketing idea that we all get riveted by, that one phrase that becomes iconic. And yet the million ideas you had to go through to get there are what we miss. It's practice 6 days a week to play one time.
Right.
One of the things that you say regularly is that there's a real common error among most companies about mixing sales and marketing. They decide, well, they're so similar, let's just put them all together. In fact, let's have a director of sales and marketing.
I shifted in my seat a bit while you were even saying it.
So it makes you that uncomfortable.
Yes,
That's good.
Yes.
So explain to those that are listening here why it is that you really blanch at the idea that those two are mixed.
It's a disservice to each of them to lump them together. The importance of each, the role of each. Marketing writes the checks and sales cashes them, but you can't do both at the same time. It waters each of them down. The skill set of a marketer, a true marketer or a marketing team, is very different from a salesperson. Marketers have to deploy patience and have to build a brand. Branding takes time. There are endless studies, even though we've moved to this world of performance marketing, which drives me crazy, which is important. I get that we have companies, they need to make sales, they need transactions. Certainly, everyone understands that. No one's disbelief or thinks that that's not what the ultimate job of what you're doing is. But brand is built over time. You cannot build brand overnight. Marketing's built over time. Sales is done overnight. The classical marketing vernacular is a purchase funnel. You go from awareness to consideration to intent to purchase. And the top of that funnel, awareness and consideration, is built with classical marketing, branding, repetition of messages, repetition of that key phrase that you talked about, a slogan or those things. So you're building awareness, you're building intent to purchase. But those things happen and take a lot of repetition, a lot of tactics, a lot of things. And that's in the classical marketing sense. And the skill set with which to do that is very unique. And then the skill set for a salesperson or someone that's managing is then cashing in on all of those things that marketing has done. You have a prospect that's aware of you, that's intent, that's now in the purchase cycle. They're ready to buy. So the tactics and the relationship building, that one-to-one dynamic, whether it's a B2B sale or a B2C sale, the getting the transaction to take place is a very different set of techniques than the set of techniques that it took to build that brand and build that marketing. Obviously, they're building towards the same thing, but it's kind of like saying the person that builds the foundation of the house is also the person that decorates it. Yes, they're all part of building a house, but they're very different.
I love it. Marketing writes the checks and sales cashes them. It's the beauty of, as you said, truth is it takes a village. I also know you're well known into the space of helping people and thinking about their personal brands. One hilarious example of your job well done is the video, the viral video about the dancing dentist, which we'll put a link to in the show notes, hundreds of millions of views. And it's hilarious. We know that the idea of a personal brand essential for athletes. I've certainly talked to a lot of athletes about understanding what it is they want to be known for. But what advice do you give business leaders on developing a personal brand and actually having something they are known for?
I'm building a class and about to start a mastermind around the radical formula, which is something I developed. And it's built on a couple of different premises. Number one, attention is currency and or leverage. When a founder or a CEO has a personal brand and has attention, that's leverage, and it drives what I call compounding interest, not in the sense of financial term, but interest in the person and in the company. Compounding interest is driven through attention that the founder or the CEO has and builds with thought leadership, awareness, and putting themselves out there. People think personal branding means, okay, definitively posts on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook and all that. And yes, that is certainly part of it, certainly part of mine. But when you think about the history, when you think about the most successful companies in the last 20 years, who do you think about when you think about with Apple?
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs. Who do you think about when you think about Amazon? Jeff Bezos. Who do we think about when we talk about Tesla? Elon Musk. All personal brands that have been developed strategically through the media and through very precise PR and marketing. Not all of it is posting on Facebook. I doubt Steve Jobs ever posted to Instagram, but he was always in a black shirt and black pants on stage, building a personal brand, building thought leadership around innovation and creativity. Jeff Bezos around convenience and shopping, and then Elon Musk around innovation, battery power, and going to Mars and whatever else he's up to.
Being crazy.
And being crazy. But those are examples of personal brands that have been developed in the most successful companies. And what that does is you start to build a relationship with that company and with that brand and with that person before you know them. Personal branding is the secret sauce to the most successful companies in America today.
The personal branding of the leader is the secret sauce to the most successful companies.
That's right.
I love that. Attention is the currency and or the leverage. The idea is doing what it takes to draw the appropriate type of attention.
And, a lot of people will ask me, I'm not that guy, I'm not that person. You better find that person in your organization that's going to be that. And can your company survive without it? Of course you can, but you better have a good product or a service. Uber, their CEO didn't necessarily have a great personal brand, but it was such a differentiator in the market at the time. And there's examples of them, but if you find a commodity product and you find a CEO that's uninvolved, I'll show you a company that probably isn't doing well.
Right. It will remain a commodity product and never rise above. You're teaching this new course. I love this, the radical formula. And I know a lot of it is around concepts you teach too, into the important elements of a good marketing campaign. It's funny. I teach storytelling for Simon Sinek. Simon hires me to work with his community into the art of storytelling. We use the exact same 3 words when you talk about what you want someone to experience at the end of a well-told story is you want them to do, think, or feel something. And that's a real driver for you in any good marketing campaign. As you're building out those concepts, as you're contemplating those ideas and trying to drive a campaign toward that direction, what are some of the ideas you might offer to listeners on how they should be thinking of their campaign to have as an end result, do, think, feel?
It really comes back to a couple things. No matter what you're doing, you have a target audience that has a current perception or a current problem, and you are trying to move the needle of that target audience from one place to another. What does a current target audience, what is their current perception of your product or service? What is the current challenge that they have that you're trying to overcome? It's all about solving problems today. And that's where it's problem solution. And that's the simplest way of saying it. But I think it's key to identify who your target audience is, because what happens now is when I see marketing campaigns fail is they're trying to throw a lot at a lot of people. They say, if you're everything to everybody, you're nothing to no one.
Absolutely.
And you have to narrow in on your target, and you have to narrow in on current perception versus desired outcome. Then we go through an exercise. We did it yesterday. I'm actually teaching a course at 11 o'clock today on creative briefing. It's based on how do we want the target to think, how do we want them to feel, and how do we want them to act? When you answer those three things, you will get to the heart of driving to a creative thought or idea. Now, at an ad agency, the way that works is we come up with that strategy. What's the target audience? How do we want them to think, feel, and act? And then we use our creative team to kind of develop those ideas. And I'll be involved on both ends of the strategy and the creative. But people think with their brain, they buy with their heart. That's why you need to identify not only how you want them to think, but how you want them to feel.
I love it. We're in a world in which data is so available. We seem to measure everything, data points more than ever, especially in the world of marketing, your world. But at your company, you make it a point not to, quote, get lost in the data. You're really careful to both understand the data, but not get lost in it. How would you encourage other leaders to balance the way they read and use data while keeping, as you love to say, creativity the most important thing?
We say all the time at our agency, we're 50% art, 50% science or data. So they're equally important, and sometimes one's more important than the others. I am a firm believer in data. It would be totally inconsistent with trends and otherwise to ignore data. But I think what's happened, though, is we've lost the art of humanity a bit in the data. Whether you're in B2B or B2C marketing, we're still dealing with humans until robots take over the planet, which might be coming sooner than we all hope. There's still a human being on the other side of the communication. And sometimes the data lies, or it points to something that can't be answered by the data alone. And I think in all decisions, and certainly in marketing, the art of marketing, the art of storytelling, which you mentioned, which we talk about a lot, is so important. And I think, back to kind of the soapbox of performance marketing, which is very data driven, very analytical driven, which is important, but it loses the impact that you get from emotional storytelling.
Right.
That is key to like the radical formula, and our radical approach here is the art of marketing and storytelling and concepting and those things.
I'd love to go to a question we ask of every guest. The upside to our guest list is that they all have athletics in their background, and so they can appreciate this question. There are many organizations, you've worked for a few, I have two, from a corporate side that talk about their organization as a team. The truth is, we know they are not, in fact, a team. They're just a bunch of independent contractors, just happen to have the same business card. If you are counseling someone, another leader, who is trying to build a team, what are some of the elements that allow you to take that group of independent contributors and make them more cohesive? What are some of the ways and the elements that you would build into creating your team?
I think it starts with one word, is transparency. And number two, it's clarity of vision and purpose. When people are doing things as individuals and they're just doing them and checking boxes, and they're not clear on exactly why they're doing it or what the end game is, you have a group of people that are not a team. And the biggest thing is setting clear goals, having clear purpose, and setting your vision. As a startup company, this is something that I've even struggled with, and trying to make sure that the vision is always clear and the purpose is clear. Where I see people struggle is they assume that everyone knows why they're doing something.
Yes, that's the worst.
It is. And it's just this assumption that everyone gets it. Well, not everyone does get it.
Right.
You've got to be transparent, not only with where your head is at as a leader, but you've also got to set a clear vision for like where we're going. Because if you want to get somewhere really slowly, then don't know where you're going. Every person that comes into our company, I literally sit down and we run through the core values of the company, what we're trying to do, who we're trying to do it for, and where we're trying to go. We're a 20-person agency, but every new employee gets run through that presentation that I give. We do weekly team meetings where I literally share what's happening with the business. I'm transparent about problems. I'm transparent about wins and losses. And I do an open forum table. We have 20 people, so it's manageable. There's ways to do this in the modern world now. If you have 200 people, everyone gets to say, speak, ask questions, and we provide and create space. We create space for people to feel comfortable asking hard questions. If you don't create that space, then you aren't allowing for that kind of natural curiosity and natural interest to take place.
You're allowing them to believe that asking a hard question is in no way going to be career limiting.
Yes.
So part one is you're direct right from the beginning, onboarding. Part two, you have regular and consistent communication updates in which you're not just delivering information, you're accepting feedback and questions. So in all of that, you're helping people to get not just the heart of what you're trying to do, but the heart of what you hope they collectively will be doing for your clients.
All of that is right. And then I'll take it a step further. You have to hire people that are of the same mindset. You could put together a group of people and do everything that I just said, but if they're not built from somewhat of the same fabric, somewhat of the same drive and interest, and talent and experience matter. If it's not experience, it needs to be talent. If it's not talent, it needs to be experience. It's a combination of those things. And so where I see teams fail is, number one, they hired wrong. They didn't hire the right mindset that can buy into the vision, or they haven't hired the talent and the experience that is appropriate for the job.
Yeah.
I'm probably the most non-traditional interviewer that I know. I don't ask the same 7 questions. In my career, I am not the best at every different thing. I have strengths and weaknesses like any other leader and everything else. I've been very blessed with an ability to hire well. I've done it well my entire career. I have an innate sense about people when I'm talking with them. It's kind of like when I interview people on my podcast, I will give an outline, but I listen to them talk, and then it leads me to certain questions. And I can kind of sense whether or not people have the mindset to be successful in our industry, what it takes. It takes a very entrepreneurial spirit. It takes a very driven person. And I actually learn more about people by the questions they ask than the questions I ask them. I ask 2 or 3 questions, and then I ask them to ask me questions. And I learn more from them asking me questions because it shows how much research they've done, how much interest they have, and how much curiosity they have.
Boy, we talk all the time about the CQ, curiosity quotient. And it's clear all of that works for you because your vision is so clear and it's so well stated in everything that you do. I love your podcast. And I know that you end all of them with a rad or fad question. Now, we do a simple this or that. I've got a few for you. You've already alluded to one, but I got to ask you, Michael Jordan or LeBron James?
Michael Jordan all day.
I'm with you, completely with you.
I respect LeBron, but it's I'm just old school, I guess. I'm showing my age, but Michael was just I had posters all over my walls. It was just my age, product of the 80s and early 90s. And, I had the posters everywhere, the shoes and everything else.
You're wearing them. I love it. Car or truck?
Sports car.
Awesome. What do you drive?
Ironically, I drive an SUV. I have a Range Rover now, but I own multiple cars. I have like an S63 AMG Mercedes. Definitely more of a car guy, even though my everyday is a Range Rover.
Ski or snowboard?
Ski.
TikTok or Instagram?
I'm getting heavy into TikTok. It's 50-50. I know that's not this or that, but it's can I have a both, Don? I'm in marketing and advertising.
Now you're running for office. All right, so let's bring it in for a close. Clemson or Florida State?
Oh, Tigers all day, baby.
Oh,
hey, we beat them. We won,
man.
It's getting to be an annual occurrence. So, but I will say this, Florida State and Miami need to be great. I wish and hope that Norvell can get it turned around.
You and me both. Ryan, I can't thank you enough for the time, for the energy, for the education. I have taken several pages of notes here, and I have all kinds of quotes and takeaways that I will be trying to figure out how to weave into the things that we're doing and our growth as well. It is an honor to have spent this time with you, and thank you so much for being a corporate competitor.
Thank you so much, Don, and your team, and you have been wonderful. So thankful for the opportunity, and would love to continue the good relationship. And you can find me anywhere at Ryan Alford on all the platforms, and the Radical Forum is launching soon. So I hope everybody will check that out.
I loved when Ryan talked about interviewing candidates at Radical. We all know that success comes from recruiting the right people to our organization. But like Ryan said, sometimes the questions the candidates ask you reveal more than any answer they might give you. Whether it's an interview or a weekly meeting, I encourage you to create an environment where people feel comfortable asking questions. It will be a game changer for your team chemistry. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir.
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.